When whispers turned into screams inside the palace corridors, no one expected that the target would be Queen Camilla herself. In a kingdom built on tradition and loyalty, the word theft had never been linked to the throne until now. The moment Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stepped forward with her accusation, the entire monarchy was shaken to its core. But what was stolen, and why did it bring Camilla to tears in front of the nation? For months, tensions between Catherine and Camilla had been rising quietly, invisible to the public, but impossible to ignore inside the palace. It began with subtle glances at official gatherings, polite smiles that carried no warmth, and conversations that ended just a little too abruptly. To most, these seemed like the ordinary rivalries of royal life, yet behind the gilded doors, those who served close to them felt the chill of something much darker, an invisible war brewing between the current queen and the future queen. Catherine, reserved yet strong, carried herself with dignity even in silence. Camilla, however, seemed unsettled, as though shadows of secrets she desperately wanted to keep hidden were closing in around her. The breaking point came not with a rumor, but with Catherine's decision to confront what had been whispered for too long. In a single breath, she unveiled a charge so devastating that the royal walls shook with disbelief. She accused Camilla of theft, not of jewels casually misplaced, not of ornaments forgotten in dusty vaults, but of something infinitely heavier. The accusation pierced straight through the veil of royal decorum and laid bare a truth no one had dared articulate before. Camilla, she said, had stolen what was never hers to claim. Palace insiders reacted with hushed urgency, spreading the story in panicked murmurs that only fueled the flames. Servants exchanged looks as though they had witnessed history itself fracture, and courtiers avoided Camilla's gaze as if they too carried guilt by association. "A stolen legacy," they whispered, their words echoing through the hallways like the toll of a bell that could not be unheard. In those moments, the monarchy was no longer bound by protocol. It was unraveling in plain sight. Outside the palace gates, the world erupted. Media outlets seized the accusation within minutes, plastering headlines with words that seemed almost unbelievable. The Queen accused of theft. Catherine confronts Camilla. Palace secrets exposed. Reporters swarmed for any scrap of confirmation, while commentators debated what such a claim could possibly mean. Was it about money? Was it about jewels? Or was it about something far more sacred? The public thirst for answers only deepened as silence draped over Buckingham like a shroud. And while the nation speculated, Camilla's composure began to break in ways she could not control. Once unshakable, she now faltered in public appearances, her voice wavering, her hands trembling. Her eyes betrayed a sorrow so deep that even her fiercest defenders could not ignore it. Insiders claimed she had been seen retreating to her private quarters in tears, inconsolable, as if the weight of the accusation had pierced through to the very core of her identity. She had spent decades climbing toward acceptance, yet now she stood accused of stealing the one thing acceptance could never give her: legitimacy. Still, despite the fury, despite the collapse of calm inside the palace, the question lingered unanswered. What exactly had been stolen? Why was Catherine so certain, so unwavering, so unafraid to speak words that would change the monarchy forever? Suspense loomed like thunderclouds ready to burst, leaving the entire nation holding its breath, waiting for the revelation that would either vindicate or destroy. But before we uncover the stolen treasure that shattered the palace walls, we must understand the centuries-old secret Catherine dared to unearth. For decades, the royal family has guarded treasures beyond imagination. Yet, the most valuable are not gold or jewels, but symbols, legacies, and heirlooms that embody power. Catherine's revelation struck deep because the alleged theft was not of wealth, but of history itself. And in that moment, the weight of centuries suddenly hung over Camilla like a curse she could no longer escape. At the center of the storm were heirlooms tied to the memory of Princess Diana, pieces meant to pass from mother to children, artifacts imbued with love, grief, and destiny. These were not ornaments tucked away for ceremonial use. They were the last tangible bridges to a woman whose presence still overshadows the monarchy. Catherine's voice trembled not with fear but with conviction, when she linked Camilla's hands to these missing treasures. In that instant, the public no longer saw a dispute between two women, they saw Diana's legacy under siege. The discovery began quietly, almost innocently, in the royal archives. Catherine, accustomed to reviewing documents that mapped the family's history, noticed irregularities. Records of jewels and papers that should have been secured were absent, shifted, or altered without explanation. At first, she questioned whether it was clerical error. But as she pressed deeper, the truth emerged like a hidden scar. Pieces once promised to William and Harry had vanished, their existence reduced to whispers in dusty ledgers. What ignited suspicion into certainty was the trail of missing jewels, pieces once seen adorning Diana in iconic moments. Among them, whispers spoke of rings and necklaces that had disappeared into secrecy, items curiously absent from both inventory and vault. These were not misplacements, they were deliberate omissions, and Catherine, methodical in her pursuit, refused to let the truth be buried in silence. The emotional gravity of the accusation was devastating. To link Diana's name to theft was to touch the deepest wound the monarchy carries. Diana was not only a princess, she was a symbol of compassion, a mirror through which the people judged the royals. To take from her legacy was not simply theft, it was desecration. Catherine's words painted the act as an unforgivable attempt to rob Diana's children of their rightful inheritance, both tangible and spiritual. The symbolism of these heirlooms stretched far beyond their glittering beauty. They represented memory, justice, and continuity. They stood as proof that despite her tragic fate, Diana's influence endured in the veins of her children and the heart of the nation. Gold fades, jewels can be replaced, but symbols endure. That was what Catherine accused Camilla of trying to erase. And for the public, such a crime was darker than any scandal of money or betrayal. Camilla's silence in the face of these revelations only deepened the suspicion. Her refusal to answer, her inability to confront the allegations directly, created the impression of guilt heavier than any admission could have. Every tear she shed, every hesitation she displayed, was read not as sorrow but as confirmation. For in silence, Catherine's voice grew stronger, echoing not just as a personal accusation but as a national reckoning. And if the missing heirlooms weren't enough to send shockwaves, what Catherine revealed next turned whispers of betrayal into undeniable screams. No one in the royal household expected Catherine to speak with such fire. But in a private gathering that quickly leaked beyond the palace gates, she uttered words no royal had dared before. Camilla has stolen what does not belong to her. The silence that followed was deafening, and the storm that erupted afterward would forever alter the monarchy's image. It was meant to be a routine meeting, a quiet assembly of senior royals and advisors gathered to address minor issues of protocol. Yet within moments, the gathering transformed into a tribunal of truth. Catherine, long regarded as composed and diplomatic, broke through her carefully maintained silence with words that cut like a blade. Her voice did not waver, and her gaze was fixed on Camilla, as though centuries of injustice had finally found their reckoning. In that charged moment, the balance of power in the room shifted. What had been whispered for weeks was now spoken aloud, inescapable and undeniable. Those present described the scene with a mix of awe and dread. Camilla, usually quick with a sharp retort, sat frozen, her composure collapsing in real time. Witnesses claimed her face drained of color, her hands trembled, and tears welled as though the accusation had pierced through every defense she had ever built. For a woman who had weathered decades of scrutiny and emerged crowned as queen, the sight of her unraveling shocked even her closest allies. And yet, Catherine showed no hesitation. Her words carried a weight that made them impossible to dismiss. This was not an impulsive outburst, nor a careless suggestion. Catherine insisted the theft was deliberate, an intentional act of betrayal against Diana's memory and the rightful inheritance of her children. She framed Camilla's actions not as mistakes, but as a premeditated attempt to seize what was sacred, and in doing so, rewrite the very story of the monarchy. For Catherine, silence was no longer an option. To protect Diana's legacy, she had to confront the woman who, in her eyes, had crossed an unforgivable line. The reactions from those closest to the throne only deepened the drama. William, torn between shock and rage, was visibly shaken, yet stood firmly beside his wife. Princess Anne, ever the truth-seeker, did not mask her astonishment, her sharp eyes fixed on Camilla as if silently demanding answers. And Charles, caught between his son and his queen, appeared broken, his loyalty divided, his silence a wound in itself. The fracture was not just between Catherine and Camilla. It was tearing the entire royal family apart, each member forced to choose where their allegiance truly lay. For many, Catherine's boldness was more than an accusation. It was a stand for justice. She was not only defending her husband's rights but the honor of Diana, the woman the world still mourned. In exposing Camilla, she positioned herself as the guardian of a legacy that could never be erased, no matter how many jewels were hidden or records altered. To the public, she became the voice of truth in a palace shrouded with secrets, the one figure unafraid to confront the crown's darkest corners. And while her words ignited a storm, Catherine understood that the battle was only beginning. For in the world of royalty, accusations, no matter how bold, were fragile, without proof. And Catherine was ready for that too. But accusations without proof would crumble under pressure. Catherine knew this. What she unveiled next was evidence too powerful to ignore. The nation gasped as documents and photographs surfaced, showing traces of Camilla's hands on treasures thought lost or hidden. It was no longer just Catherine's word, it was black and white evidence that Camilla had crossed a line no royal was meant to cross. And with each piece of proof laid bare, Camilla's tears grew heavier, her denials weaker. The revelations came like thunderclaps in a silent sky. Catherine did not simply accuse, she presented irrefutable proof. Stamped letters, signatures, and carefully dated inventory logs exposed movements of heirlooms that had never been authorized. Papers revealed that jewels once recorded as secured for William and Harry were suddenly signed out under Camilla's name, marked as temporary transfer, yet never returned. The inconsistencies were glaring, the chain of custody broken, and the silence from the royal vault keepers spoke volumes. What had once been rumor was now bound in ink and paper, impossible to dismiss. But it did not stop with documents. Secret correspondences emerged, whispering of deliberate concealment. Exchanges between Camilla and trusted confidantes hinted at intentions that went beyond protocol. Phrases like, "best kept from their eyes" and "better in our possession than theirs" sent shockwaves through those who read them. For the first time, even those who had long defended Camilla found themselves speechless. This was not a clerical mistake. It was strategy. It was intent. It was theft, wrapped in silk. The visual evidence made the scandal undeniable. Photographs, some grainy, others clear, revealed Camilla wearing or holding jewels whose existence the palace had claimed was lost. Brooches Diana had once pinned with pride. Necklaces Catherine herself had expected to pass to her daughter. Rings that once symbolized promises made and broken. To see them paraded in plain sight, under Camilla's possession, ignited fury like wildfire. Even the most loyal courtiers, those who had once stood unshakably by her side, could not excuse what their eyes now confirmed. Outside the palace, the public's anger roared. Cries echoed across television screens, radios, and streets. Diana's jewels belonged to her children, not Camilla. The outrage was not about gold or diamonds. It was about memory, inheritance, justice. People saw in Catherine's proof not just theft, but an attempt to bury Diana's shadow, to silence her influence by stripping her children of the legacy she had left behind. That truth, once spoken, could not be unheard. For William, the impact was deeply personal. Standing beside Catherine as the evidence unfolded, he refused to remain silent. His voice, steady but heavy with grief, made it clear he believed his wife. He believed in her fight, in her relentless pursuit of justice. And with that alignment, Catherine's position grew stronger. Her accusations transformed into an unshakable charge, backed not just by documents but by the future king's support. Camilla's pleas, once tinged with confidence, now carried no weight. Her attempts to explain, her insistence that she had only safeguarded these treasures, fell flat against the mountain of evidence. The palace itself grew restless. Staff who had once defended her began stepping back, whispering that the queen had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The walls that had long shielded her now seemed to close in, trapping her in a scandal she could no longer outrun. And yet, the evidence was only the surface of a storm, for beneath it lay years of secrecy, manipulation, and a betrayal no one saw coming. What Catherine revealed next tore open the very fabric of royal secrecy. Behind closed doors, Camilla had allegedly orchestrated secret dealings, moving jewels, shifting archives, and controlling narratives to secure her own place on the throne. These were not accidents of mismanagement, they were acts of intent, planned in silence, waiting to be exposed. The documents Catherine unearthed painted a portrait of quiet maneuvering that stretched back years. Hidden in coded correspondence and private memos, whispers of secret agreements emerged. Camilla had allegedly leaned on trusted courtiers to move jewels out of sight, to shift inventories just enough so questions would fade into silence. What seemed like bureaucratic errors to outsiders now appeared as a deliberate web spun in the shadows of Buckingham Palace. It was no coincidence, Catherine declared, it was strategy. Even more disturbing were the ties Catherine uncovered between Camilla and members of royal staff. Longtime attendants, archivists, and keepers of tradition had, in subtle ways, enabled her actions. Some out of loyalty, others out of fear. Their signatures appeared on transfer slips, their initials marked approvals that should never have been granted. For the first time, the nation saw the monarchy not as a fortress of loyalty, but as a house compromised from within, where trust had been quietly bartered for influence. The manipulation that stretched far beyond jewels. Archives once thought immovable had been tampered with, their records adjusted to conceal the trail of absence. Files detailing Diana's heirlooms had been repositioned, entries altered, and official explanations crafted to create an illusion of order. Catherine exposed this as nothing less than an attempt to rewrite history itself, an effort to erase Diana's rightful place in the royal lineage and replace it with Camilla's. To Catherine, this was not only theft but betrayal of the very truth that the monarchy was meant to protect. In the face of such revelations, Camilla broke down in tearful defense. She claimed she had been misunderstood, that her actions had been born out of duty rather than deception. She argued she had safeguarded what others would have squandered, that she had acted to preserve rather than to steal. But her words fell flat against the growing storm. To those listening, her tears seemed less like sorrow and more like desperation, the tears of a queen whose carefully built facade was crumbling. The palace itself plunged into chaos. Every staff member suddenly stood under suspicion. Allegiances were questioned. Whispers spread through corridors like poison, and the once united institution fractured further. For every person who defended Camilla's intentions, two others condemned them. Catherine's revelations had not only shaken the throne, it had shattered the fragile trust that kept the monarchy upright. But even as secrets spilled out, one haunting question lingered. Why would Camilla risk it all for theft that could never truly be hidden? Every scandal has a motive, and when Catherine exposed Camilla's, the nation finally understood the tears. Camilla wasn't accused of stealing jewels for vanity or power. She was accused of trying to erase the one ghost she could never escape, Diana. By possessing what once belonged to Diana, Catherine claimed, Camilla hoped to bury the memory of the woman the world still mourned. The revelation cut deeper than the jewels themselves. Catherine spoke not of greed, but of fear, a fear that had haunted Camilla since the day she stepped into Diana's shadow. No matter how many titles she claimed, no matter how many crowns she wore, Diana's name was always louder, stronger, eternal. The world's love for Diana was undiminished by time, and Camilla, Catherine argued, sought to claim the only pieces left of her in a desperate attempt to silence that ghost. Diana's presence was everywhere, portraits that still adorned halls, tributes that poured in every anniversary, memories carried in William and Harry's very faces. For Camilla, Catherine suggested, these reminders were unbearable. The heirlooms tied to Diana were not mere trinkets. They were the last fragments of a legacy that no amount of royal polish could overshadow. By taking them, hiding them, wearing them, Camilla was not simply coveting treasure, she was attempting to rewrite the narrative, to shift history so that Diana's radiance would fade beneath her own reign. Catherine framed the theft as something darker than possession. This was not about jewels or records, it was about memory itself. To rob Diana's children of these pieces was to attempt to sever their link to their mother. It was to rob William of his inheritance, not just in material but in spirit, to deny Harry the tangible reminders of a love he had lost too soon. Catherine's words struck at the heart of the monarchy's conscience, turning the scandal from a crime of possession into an assault on legacy. The public's reaction grew fiercer. Sympathy that might once have softened toward Camilla turned into open hostility. Crowds cried out that Diana's name could not be erased, her story could not be stolen. Commentators spoke of a queen waging war not against Catherine, but against the memory of a woman who had already paid the ultimate price. For a monarchy already fragile under scrutiny, the people's verdict was damning. The nation had chosen its side, and it was not with Camilla. Yet, in the midst of it all, Camilla's tears deepened. To some, they seemed like the tears of a woman overwhelmed, perhaps misunderstood, drowning in a sea of accusations. But to many more, they were the tears of guilt, the visible unraveling of a queen whose mask had slipped. The more she wept, the more her silence felt like confession. And the more Catherine stood firm, the clearer it became that this was no longer about proof, it was about perception. And perception, once hardened, becomes impossible to reverse. But the storm did not end with motive, it escalated into open warfare within the royal family itself. The walls of Buckingham Palace have contained many battles, but none so raw, so personal, as this. With Catherine and William on one side, and Camilla desperately clinging to Charles on the other, the royal family fractured in plain sight. Every look, every whisper, every meeting became a battlefield, where betrayal and loyalty collided. The moment William stepped forward to defend his wife, the balance of power shifted irreversibly. No longer was Catherine's voice the lone challenger. She now had the future king standing firmly at her side. His declaration of support was not made with anger but with steely resolve, and it resounded like a cannon blast through the palace. The son had chosen his path, and that path placed him in direct opposition to his father's queen. To the world, it was a shocking rupture. To those inside the palace, it was nothing less than civil war. Charles, caught between the woman he had crowned and the son he had raised, was plunged into torment. His loyalty to Camilla demanded defense, but his bond to William, fragile though it had often been, pleaded for understanding. Each passing day forced him into impossible choices, and every hesitation only deepened the cracks in the monarchy. In private, he was seen pacing, restless, worn down, by a storm he could no longer contain. His silence, meant as diplomacy, became an emblem of weakness. Into this chaos stepped Princess Anne. Refusing to stay silent, she placed herself as mediator. Though her allegiance leaned unmistakably toward Catherine, Anne's sharp words and unyielding sense of duty made her a force impossible to dismiss. She confronted Camilla directly, pressing her to account for the accusations, and in doing so, added even more weight to Catherine's cause. Her presence in the fray stripped away any illusion that this was a matter confined to whispers. It was now a battle fought openly, sibling against sibling, queen against princess. The court staff, once loyal shadows, became unwilling witnesses to the unraveling. Their accounts spilled into the press, like rivers breaching their banks. Details of shouting matches, slammed doors, and meetings dissolved into chaos. The palace could no longer contain its own secrets. Every leaked word fed a media machine hungry for scandal, and every headline pulled the monarchy deeper into disgrace. Beyond the gates, the people raised their voices louder. Crowds gathered with placards and chants demanding that Diana's legacy be honored, that her memory not be erased by jewels hidden in silence. The public's fury was no longer about theft, it was about justice. The streets echoed with grief transformed into protest, a nation once again rallying behind the woman who had become immortal in their hearts. The monarchy's image spiraled further into chaos with each passing day. What had once been dismissed as family dispute now stood as a symbol of corruption, betrayal, and division at the very top. Catherine and William were painted as defenders of truth, while Camilla and Charles were cast as clinging to shadows of deceit. The illusion of unity, carefully constructed for decades, lay in ruins. And as the war raged within, the outside world demanded one thing only: a final reckoning. The day arrived when silence was no longer an option. Standing before cameras, Camilla, Catherine, William, and Charles appeared together, but unity was an illusion. As Catherine repeated her accusations, Camilla could no longer hold back the flood of tears. What unfolded before the nation was not just a reckoning, it was the tearing down of an illusion carefully built for decades. The appearance had been announced hastily, framed as an attempt to calm the storm that had engulfed the monarchy. Yet, from the moment the royals took their places, the tension was unmistakable. Catherine stood tall, her expression firm, her voice unwavering as she spoke the words that had already circled the globe. Camilla had stolen what was not hers. She did not soften her tone, she did not dilute her accusation. Instead, she delivered it with the same conviction that had ignited the palace war. Only now, the entire world was listening. Camilla, confronted before millions, broke down in front of the cameras. Her tears fell freely, her composure shattering as the accusations reverberated across every screen. For some, her crying stirred sympathy, the image of a woman crushed beneath the weight of scandal. For many more, however, those tears became the defining image of guilt, a moment where denial dissolved into silence. Her anguish could not erase the evidence, nor could it silence Catherine's relentless demand for truth. And then there was Charles. The king, a figure meant to embody strength and stability, stood frozen, his silence louder than any words he might have spoken. He did not come to Camilla's defense with passion, nor did he challenge Catherine's bold stand. His refusal to speak was interpreted by millions as an unspoken admission, a weary acknowledgement that Catherine's accusations had merit. The monarch himself seemed powerless to protect the very woman he had once fought the world to crown. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Sympathy poured out for Catherine, who had faced the crown itself to protect Diana's legacy and her children's inheritance. She was hailed as courageous, principled, and fearless, a woman who had risked everything to defend what was right. The tide of public opinion, already swelling against Camilla, became a tidal wave of outrage. Across cities, towns, and villages, the people declared that Diana's memory had finally found its defender. Yet, the spectacle also exposed the monarchy's deepest wound. The facade of unity had been ripped away in a single moment, and what the world saw instead was a family broken beyond repair. The accusations, the evidence, the tears, every element came together as a public unraveling of trust, leaving no corner untouched by scandal. The monarchy had not faced a reckoning of this magnitude in generations, and the scars it left would not easily heal. But even after the tears, one final question remained. What would become of Camilla now that her secrets stood in the open? Every throne is fragile, every crown heavy with shadows. For Camilla, the accusation of royal theft may mark the beginning of her fall. For Catherine, it is a moment of triumph, but also a dangerous gamble. The monarchy stands on a knife's edge, and the question echoes louder than ever. Who truly deserves to wear the crown when betrayal has left scars that may never heal? The aftermath was swift and merciless. Camilla, once celebrated as the queen who had finally carved out her place beside Charles, now stood on crumbling ground. Every appearance she made was clouded with whispers, every smile interpreted as a mask hiding shame. The once unshakable dignity of her office had been stripped bare, leaving only the fragile figure of a woman struggling against the weight of accusation. The palace, once her fortress, now felt like a prison where every corridor echoed with judgment. Demands for her removal grew louder by the day. Newspapers splashed bold headlines, questioning whether she could remain in her role, while commentators debated if abdication from public duties was the only path forward. Outside palace gates, crowds demanded justice not only for Catherine and William, but for Diana's legacy itself. Protesters carried placards, voices united in a single cry: Camilla must go. The people no longer saw her as a queen, but as a shadow, clinging desperately to a throne she had tarnished. In stark contrast, Catherine rose higher than ever. She was not just the future queen consort, she was now regarded as the protector of Diana's memory, the guardian of a legacy too precious to be forgotten. Her defiance, her courage, and her unshakable resolve had reshaped her public image into something formidable. She was no longer simply William's wife. She was a warrior in the eyes of the nation, a woman who had stood against deceit and dared to speak the truth when silence might have been easier. With Camilla's standing diminished, the survival of the monarchy itself seemed to rest upon Catherine and William. Together, they became the embodiment of hope, the vision of a renewed crown free from the shadows of betrayal. The people, weary of scandal, turned to them as the ones capable of rebuilding trust. Their every step was watched, their every word dissected, as if the future of the institution itself was bound to their choices. For the first time in generations, the monarchy's heartbeat seemed to beat in unison with the will of the public. Yet, Camilla's fate remained shrouded in uncertainty. Would she face formal punishment, stripped of her duties and exiled into silence? Or would she retreat quietly, her influence fading into the background while others carried the burden of the crown? The palace refused to answer, its silence as haunting as the accusations that had begun it all. And in that silence, speculation thrived. Some believed she would vanish from public life altogether. Others feared her influence, though diminished, would never truly disappear. The scandal left the monarchy at a crossroads. One queen stood disgraced, another rose as the symbol of resilience, and the echoes of Diana's legacy reverberated stronger than ever. The people had chosen their side, but the institution itself lingered in dangerous limbo, unsure of how much more it could endure before breaking entirely. And so, the palace walls may stand tall, but the echoes of Catherine's accusation will haunt them forever. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.